Hello and welcome to the WMA Podcast, episode 13 of season 9. I'm your host, Brandon Klump. Joining us today is Dan Solin, a New York Times bestselling author of the smartest series of investing books, as well as Ask How to Relate to Anyone, which we will focus on today, as well as his most recent, Wealthier, the investing field guide for Millennials. He's also the president of Solin Strategic LLC, where he provides sales coaching to advisory firms globally. In today's episode, we'll explore key insights from Dan's work, including how college students in wealth management can use curiosity and listening to connect with peers and employers, and actionable steps to enhance these skills. Thank you and enjoy.
Hey, Dan, thanks for coming on the WMA podcast.
Very excited to be here, Brandon. Thank you for asking me.
So jumping right into it, in your book, Ask How to Relate to Anyone, you emphasize the power of curiosity and learning and listening in building relationships. So for college students studying wealth management, how can they harness these skills to better connect with peers as well as potential employers?
The beauty of what I write about in Ask is that it's applicable in virtually every human interaction. So it doesn't have to be limited. There's nothing special about wealth management that says, oh, I must act differently because I'm involved in a wealth interaction. So the way anybody can do it is by putting their agenda aside, actually saying to themselves, all I care about now is learning more about this person who's in front of me. So whatever they say, I'm going to ask them, I'm going to show a genuine, non-manipulative interest in what they're saying. And I'm going to do something that is very rare in human interactions. Instead of responding with some affirmative statement of my own, what I'm going to do is say something to them like, tell me more about that, or tell me how that made you feel, or I'm interested in that. What was that experience like? Transfer or flip your brain from making affirmative reactions to asking questions.
Yeah, great. And so what can students do? What actionable steps can students do in college to improve those skills?
So I'm trying to think back when I was in college. It was many years ago. I do remember, however, being totally self-absorbed, and maybe, to be fair, far beyond college, in law school and beyond that. I think, college years are kind of like prime time for narcissists. We really believe that we're the center of the universe. We have so much going on. Excuse me. We're contemplating our careers. Our life is in flux. So we think that, everybody must be interested in us, in what we're doing, in the daily minutia of our life. So a harsh lesson is that most people really aren't interested in us. They're interested in them. They have the same agenda for themselves. So it's what I call the battle of the agendas. College students have to try even harder than older adults because they are more inclined to talk about themselves than to be self-absorbed. So they have to affirmatively say, in this interaction, I am not going to focus on myself. I'm going to genuinely listen. Not competitively listen, genuinely listen. Competitive listening is I'm pretending to listen to you, but I'm really just waiting for you to stop talking. Genuine listening is, I'm hearing exactly what you're saying, and that raises some issues that I want clarified, and I'm going to ask you about those.
Right. And so I think I have, had issues with this myself, and I'm sure other students too. But sometimes when you're in environments with successful professionals, it's hard to get over the anxiety. So what advice do you have on helping students, to listen and to come up with questions while they're listening, and not just be focused on the anxiety that comes with talking to these professionals?
So it's understandable that, younger people are intimidated by older people who've achieved something in life. But what you will find is that from a neuroscience point of view, all of our brains are really kind of the same. And if there's one commonality, it's that we all love to talk about ourselves, whether we're just starting out in life or whether we're a Nobel Prize winner in economics. We love to give advice. We love to educate other people. We love the sound of our own voices. We love to be pontificating. We love to educate. The problem with this is the other person doesn't love it so much. So there's actually a very interesting study that did some brain imagery, and it showed that while I'm pontificating and lecturing to you, your brain is showing the same signs from a neurospective perspective that it would demonstrate if you as if you were in physical pain. So you're really struggling to be interested and to stay focused. So you're now in a situation with a really impressive professor. It's a social situation. You're feeling really awkward. I can guarantee you that if you ask very simple, open-ended questions like, how did you become a professor? Like, what made you make that decision to do that rather than go into private business? Just ask a very simple, open-ended question. The floodgates will open. You'll probably not have to ask any other questions, but if you do, if they're an introvert like I am, they're not going to talk for a really long time, then just ask other simple, open-ended follow-up questions. It's a great way to reduce anxiety. Oh, and it always works. I'm hesitant to say this, but it really is true. This has a 100% success rate when done right.
Right. So, how do students differentiate themselves when they're doing interviews or networking events? A lot of what you said can kind of answer that question, but is there any specific practices for students preparing for, that big step in their, first real full-time career?
So the key to human interactions is making an emotional connection, right? That's the trick. So if you look at a lot of psychological studies and say, why are some people more successful than other people? The answer is not, and this did surprise me when I was doing the research, the answer isn't, because they're much smarter, they're Mensa level IQ, or because they know their subject matter so much better than the other interviewee. Their answer is because they are more likable. So when I was doing the research for Ask, I was thinking, if the coin of the realm is being more likable, so I'm in an interview situation, which we're all in, by the way. Like, you may not think it, like at my age, I'm still being interviewed, but people interview me for speaking gigs and for webinars and for all kinds of stuff. So if I have to be more likable, how am I going to do this? Okay, well, I don't think of myself as being particularly likable. Introverts aren't terribly likable. We're not very charismatic. We're not outgoing, engaged. We don't hold a crowd. I mean, there's a lot of things that make it harder for an introvert, but we do know how to ask questions. We do know how to show a genuine interest in other people. And this is simple neuroscience 101. What the image studies show, that when they do imagery of your brain in real time, what those studies show is when you're talking about yourself, your brain lights up the same way as it would light up as if you're engaged in the most pleasurable activities you could be engaged in, whatever that is for you, addictive drugs or gambling or whatever. So when I read that, I was thinking, I wonder if being likable is any more complicated than getting people to talk about themselves. So that question I threw out at you with the professor, how did you become a professor? Or you're meeting a couple and you'd say to them, how did you meet each other? These are wonderful questions that are guaranteed to get people to talk about themselves. They will leave that meeting not knowing why, but they'll say, that Brandon, there was something about him. He's really likable. They won't know what happened, but the reason you were likable is you turned on the prefrontal cortex of their brain without even knowing it and got them to talk about themselves.
Yeah, that's awesome. So can you go into the importance of quality or meaningful connections rather than the quantity of connections, filling that 500 plus LinkedIn followers.
Yeah, that's a tough one actually. Again, a lot depends on whether people are introverts or extroverts, right? Extroverts need a lot of friends and they need a crowd. Introverts, like I have very few friends. We don't need many friends. And so I'm going to give you an answer that's biased for me and my own personality, which is I'm into quality over quantity. But I don't mean to imply that that's right for everybody, because for some extroverts, they may need both quality and quantity. So I can't give you like one answer that fits everybody.
Right. Well, no, that makes sense. And then, so we discussed there a lot of on the behavioral side. Um, what is the importance of the technical knowledge in wealth management, and what can students do, outside of the classroom to have a better grasp of the knowledge?
So I don't mean at all to imply that having technical knowledge is not critically important, because it absolutely is. I just assume it's a given. If people have the kind of education that you have and are going to be working where you're going to be working, you're going to have the technical knowledge. So having technical knowledge is critically important. The issue that I find interesting with wealth advisors is this. I write books saying I could teach a 7-year-old how to invest intelligently, certainly more intelligent than most people invest. I just don't think investing is that complicated. I really don't. Buy 2 ETFs, you'll be fine. Buy 1 target date fund from Vanguard, you'll be fine. So part of it is, and I think this is kind of a critical point, when people study something, they have a vested interest in making it appear very complicated. They start talking in all kinds of acronyms and making things seem difficult. But I think the real skill is making complicated things simple. So what I'd be counseling people is to make it really simple. Bill Bernstein, who's a great writer and I just think one of our leading kind of financial gurus, he's written books that I cannot get through. They're so dense and so deep. But he's also written some of the If You Can, is a book that's like 25 pages long, where he lays out in the simplest terms how to be an intelligent investor. That to me is genius. So being able to simplify, I think is a wonderful trait. And to have the inner security to say, I can tell you how to invest. It's really not very complicated. You could do it yourself for the most part. I mean, if you have large estate, complicated stuff, you need me. If you're coming to me just to invest your money, you've got $50,000, buy a target date fund.
Right. Well, Dan, that sums up my questions. I greatly appreciate you coming on the WMA podcast. I know our student listeners will greatly benefit from today's podcast. And I just want to say, if you haven't read Ask or any of Dan's other books, then you should. He's truly an amazing writer and spreads a lot of very important wisdom that can greatly benefit you from the start of your career, like where I'm at and where the listeners are at, to beyond to long-term desires of being an advisor one day, and then also, to your point, just benefit you as a person. So thanks again, Dan.
Thank you, Brandon. I appreciate the plug. Thanks so much.
If you enjoyed the discussion, please like and share the podcast on Apple and Spotify. The Spartan Journal podcast is part of Michigan State University's Wealth Management Association, a student organization whose goal is to inspire the next generation of financial advisors. The Spartan Journal news team releases a newsletter every Monday morning comprised of financial literacy and the week's market updates. Feel free to follow us on social media at msuwma, and check out our website at msuwma.com. Anything heard on either the MSU WMA or Spartan Journal podcasts is for educational purposes only and should not be considered as investment advice.